Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're taking a dramatic forensic deep dive into one of the wildest stories in modern sports history. We're looking at Portsmouth Football Club's unbelievable rise to the absolute peak of English football and their devastating, totally unprecedented fall. It's a story of blind ambition, insane spending, and ultimately, absolute financial ruin.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Here is the central investigative question we need to answer today. How on earth does a football club go from lifting one of the most prestigious trophies in the world in front of nearly 90,000 screaming fans at Wembley to literally fighting for its very survival in bankruptcy court pretty much in the blink of an eye?
Well, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the ultimate FA Cup high before looking at buying the dream and where the financial meltdown begins. After that, we'll cover an ownership carousel, the pain of administration, and finally, rebuilding from the ashes. Let's get right to it. Starting off with Section 1, the ultimate FA Cup high, and reaching the 2008 summit. To really grasp the fall, we have to understand the peak, right? The 2007-08 season under manager Harry Redknapp was just electric. Portsmouth didn't just compete, they thrived, grabbing an unbelievable 8th-place finish in the Premier League. And honestly, nothing captured their raw, chaotic, attacking energy quite like that match against Reading at Fratton Park, a 7-4 victory. Yeah, 11 goals in a single Premier League game, with 8 of them packed into the second half. It was just pure entertainment. The team felt totally unstoppable.
And man, that momentum carried them all the way to Wembley Stadium on May 17, 2008. Packed house, a record-breaking crowd for the newly rebuilt stadium, squaring off against Cardiff City in the FA Cup final. It was tense, for sure, but then in the 37th minute, striker Nwankwo Kanu side-foots the decisive goal. Portsmouth wins 1-0. It secured their first major trophy since 1950. Seriously, a wait of almost 60 years finally over. The absolute euphoria on the South Coast, it was unreal. They were champions, and they'd even booked a ticket to European football.
But that brings us to Section 2, buying the dream and the true price of football glory. Because to really figure out what fueled all that success, we have to pull back the curtain on this massive, multi-million-pound spending spree happening behind the scenes. Just look at the transfer fees for that 2007-2008 season alone. £7 million for Sully Muntari, another $7 million for John Utaka. $9 million dropped in the January window for Jermaine Defoe. They were assembling this incredible star-studded squad, handing out top-tier transfer fees and absolutely massive wages. The financial engine was running red-hot, powered by their owner at the time, Sasha Gaidama. But here is where our narrative takes a really stark turn. In less than 2 years, the club went from the absolute high of becoming FA Cup champions to the grim reality of entering administration and getting slapped with a 9-point deduction in the league. It's honestly one of the most rapid, devastating falls from grace in sports history. So, what exactly triggered this total collapse? Which leaves us right into Section 3, the financial meltdown begins, as we start following the missing money. So it really kicked off when the global economic collapse hit. All that overspending on players, the mortgaging of future revenues, the sky-high wages, it left the club incredibly vulnerable. Owner Sasha Gaidama was forced to pull his funding, and suddenly banks like Standard Bank and Barclays were knocking on the door, demanding repayment on some massive loans. The initial estimate of the debt staring the club in the face, a staggering £50 million. Panic officially began to set in at Fratton Park. Actually, scratch that. It was way, way worse. When the books were finally pried open, the true reality of the debt was closer to £100 million, literally double the initial estimate. To put that into perspective, the club was just bleeding cash, entirely over-leveraged, and the bare minimum money required to just keep the lights on, it simply wasn't there. That sheer panic resulted in Section 4 and ownership carousel, bringing total chaos at the top. Desperate for cash, the club was passed around like a hot potato, leading to some serious boardroom absurdity. Let's track this. In a single season, Portsmouth went through 4 different owners. No, seriously, Gaidama sold it to Solomon Al-Fahim in a supposed £60 million deal. But when Al-Fahim didn't actually have the promised investment, it went to Ali Al-Faraj, who had to borrow $17 million from a businessman named Bolram Chainrai. And when Al-Faraj defaulted on that loan just weeks later, Chainrai ended up taking control of the club. The instability was dizzying. And right in the middle of this chaos, a guy named Daniel Azugi, an Israeli former lawyer and convicted fraudster, was actually brought in to restructure the club's debts. He's making executive decisions, totally circumventing the Portsmouth board.
And even he was shocked by the financial black hole, saying you cannot prepare for £50 million, then only later discover it is £100 million. I mean, when your financial fixer, who the Premier League literally banned from their meetings, is overwhelmed by your debt, yeah, you know the situation is completely terminal.
Which sadly brings us to Section 5, the pain of administration, and the devastating human cost of this collapse.
In February 2010, the inevitable happened. Portsmouth made history for all the wrong reasons, becoming the first ever Premier League club to enter administration. And the fallout was immediate. HM Revenue and Customs chased them relentlessly for unpaid taxes. The Premier League hit them with that brutal 9-point deduction, virtually guaranteeing their relegation. Plus, the administrator, Andrew Andronico, had to make insanely deep cuts to try and bring that $80 million plus debt down, resulting in massive, incredibly painful staff layoffs. But the corporate collapse also created some genuinely absurd real-world fallout. Take Mark Duggan, for example. He's a fan who had legally registered a company called Portsmouth Football Club Limited. Because of the name mix-up, he actually started receiving the football club's court orders and demands for unpaid bills directly at his own house. He literally had to march down to the stadium offices to hand them their own debt collection notices. Just crazy. But ultimately, the victims here weren't just wealthy investors, right? They were local people. Terry Clark, a builder and a lifelong fan of 50 years, actually did extension work on the dressing rooms at Fratton Park right before the crisis hit, and he was left entirely out of pocket. Like he said, they played on his loyalties because they knew he wouldn't put pressure on the club he loved. It's a harsh reminder that local businesses and loyal fans were the true collateral damage of this reckless pursuit of glory. Moving into our final chapter, Section 6, Rebuilding from the Ashes and the Long Road Back. The hangover from that 2008 FA Cup win was absolutely brutal. The financial rot on the inside completely matched the collapse on the pitch. They were relegated from the Premier League in 2011, but the freefall didn't stop there. By 2012, they dropped again to League One. And then, shortly after, they suffered another drop, plummeting all the way down to League Two, the fourth tier of English football. An FA Cup winning side had basically disintegrated in just 5 seasons. Unbelievable. But hey, there is a silver lining to this deep dive. When the club was hovering right on the absolute brink of liquidation, it was the fans who stepped up to the plate. The Pompey Supporters Trust banded together, raised the funds, and officially took over the club, saving it from being wiped off the map entirely. They stabilized Portsmouth, eventually leading to a promotion back to League One, before the club was securely sold back into private ownership in 2017. When everyone else bailed, the fans proved to be the ultimate safety net. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, leaving us with a pretty massive question to ponder. We all love to see our teams lift trophies, sign superstar players, and pull off the impossible. But looking at Portsmouth's Icarus-like flight, flying so incredibly high only for the wax on their wings to melt under the heat of a £100 million debt, we have to ask, is the modern pursuit of football glory fundamentally broken? What are the true hidden costs of immediate sporting success? Really think about your own favorite club the next time a billionaire owner shows up promising the world. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the story behind the stats.